Hey, Strongholders, it's me, Steven Zeiner. I'm in the process of literally rolling up my sleeves, actually, to take a careful look at the Q3 2022 investor presentation slide deck. And what I'm going to be doing then is highlighting certain parts that jump out, to me at least, as being interesting or relevant or thought-provoking. And in so doing, maybe instigate some conversation and some discussion about some of the metrics and some of the news and information that's being released in this in this particular presentation. So let's go ahead and get to it. Okay, so the very first thing that jumps out is right near the top of the presentation on page 3. It talks about how a substantial portion of debt has been extinguished, essentially. And so the current principal amount of debt is around $82 million, and the net debt is around $55 million, which is a 51% reduction since June 30th of 2022. That's really relevant from my perspective because it shows that the company is in fact successfully deleveraging a lot of its operations, which is critical, just given the fact that it's a very challenging environment right now. So that's something I think that's quite noteworthy. Okay, so something else that really jumps out, and it kind of pertains to debt and liquidity. It has to do with the fact that as of November 7th, which is just a day or two ago, the company had about $27 million in cash and around 19 Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And the plan is to conservatively manage that cash and to be disciplined in opportunistically rebuilding the mining fleet. So, 27 million in cash, 19 Bitcoin, that's, from my perspective, that's great. That's fantastic, in fact. And so I think that is noteworthy as well. Okay, so the next item that really sort of jumps out to me, it has to do, and I want to go through this very slowly, it has to do essentially with the net cost of power. And that's something that I've been really thinking a lot about lately, right? This whole question of, okay, how can we wrap our heads around, a number, ideally in the form of a megawatt hour number, right? To represent the amount of, or the cost, I should say, of the power that's being produced, the electricity that's being produced at both Scrubgrass and at Panther Creek. So the expectation, okay, that beginning in Q1 2023, which is just right around the corner, the expectation is for that power cost to be between $45 and $50 per megawatt hour in net cost of power. Now, I do recall Matt mentioning in the conference call a slightly similar number. He was saying something to the effect of like between $46 and $52 per megawatt hour. So again, once, I'll re-listen to the call, multiple times. And so I'll kind of clarify that in my own mind. But at least, what's printed on the investor presentation on page 3 is the range of $45 to $50 per megawatt hour. Now, how that's calculated is as follows. So net cost of power calculated by taking fuel cost plus O&M expense minus capacity revenue minus waste coal tax credit income, and then dividing that, so you add all that up and then divided by the megawatt hours produced. So given the fact I was just kind of working through some of these calculations last night, I'm highly appreciative of the fact that I can now get a real concrete sense of how this particular number is being calculated. So I'm familiar with fuel costs, I'm familiar with O&M expenses. So general and administrative is not being included, and that's fine. I mean, I'm just going based on what's printed here. Capacity revenue, I'm 99% sure I know what that's in reference to, but I'm going to double check something just to be sure. And and I'm fully familiar with the waste coal tax credit income. So, okay, this I think is very noteworthy. I'm going to have to crunch some numbers, do some math, kind of play with that formula a bit, and but I think that's incredibly interesting and relevant because it at least provides a formal metric through which to calculate this cost, which is something that comes up a lot sometimes in these investor calls. So anyway, the targeted net cost of power operationally at least will be $45 to $50 a megawatt hour starting in Q1 2023. So interesting and thought-provoking. Okay, so the next item that strikes me as thought-provoking and noteworthy has to do with the mining fleet. So, as I've said before, Stronghold is essentially a company that produces something called electricity. Okay, and then what is done with that electricity really is what differentiates it from a lot of other, Bitcoin related entities. In that, Stronghold, because they produce electricity as their, first and foremost as like the main product, that can be sold to the PJM grid, or it can alternatively be used in-house to power Bitcoin mining machines. So right now, and this is something I think it bears some additional analysis and running some numbers, but it appears as if though the current hash rate as of November 8th, 2022 is 1.9 exahash. So what's intriguing about that is that in addition to, let's use the word, as they say here, legacy agreements, recent purchases, there's now a new hosting agreement with a company called Foundry, and that includes approximately 4,500 hosted miners received from Foundry at a 50-50 profit share reduced by a 60 megawatt hour fee. So, and something that was also pointed out in the call itself is that Stronghold retains the ability to sell that electricity to the grid should, grid pricing be more favorable than mining for Bitcoin, and there's no, penalty or fee, or problem with Stronghold doing that. Now, I believe, I forget which analyst asked this, but it was a great question. It was one that was in my mind too. Well, on the flip side, what if the economics of mining Bitcoin are such that it just doesn't make sense to mine Bitcoin? Is that 60 megawatt hour fee, is that something that Foundry is, stuck having to pay even if they're not mining any Bitcoin? And the answer is no. So it strikes me as a very fair agreement to all parties, like the ultimate win-win situation. So the 50-50 profit share reduced by that 60 megawatt hour fee. So, I think the way that I'll approach this for the purpose of my homemade dashboard is to sort of look at PJM pricing and sort of determine, if it's greater than 60 megawatt or $60 per megawatt hour, odds are, there won't really be any Bitcoin mining taking place. If I were to right now, in fact, I'm going to go to Zyner.com. Okay, so right now, the PJM Penelec node is at $31.76. The PJM PPL node, which Panther Creek is a part of, is at $32.02. So clearly the economics of selling to the grid at this moment in time are not as favorable as mining Bitcoin, which as of right this moment, the Bitcoin megawatt hour equivalent is around $63.53 per megawatt hour. So it obviously it clearly makes sense to be mining Bitcoin. So I'll have to do some additional math to figure out how how do we sort of specifically calculate the revenue in the context of, say, doing this in real time that Stronghold gets from this arrangement with Foundry, which again strikes me as a very fair agreement to both sides. So again, I think that's noteworthy because at the very, the big benefit to that is that there's no additional capex, right? It's not like Stronghold has to go out there and buy additional mining machines to make this happen. So that's good. To quote, I believe, Greg from the presentation, this is kind of like a placeholder arrangement, and it sounds as if though there may be some talk to potentially purchase these miners directly from Foundry at some point in the future. So anyway, that is noteworthy from my perspective. So I should just quickly point out that on page 4, there is some additional verbiage that kind of describes the relationship between Stronghold and Foundry in a little bit more detail. And I do think it's highly relevant that there's a sentence here that says executed a non-binding letter of intent to purchase, that is for Stronghold to purchase, hosted miners in exchange for limited cash plus equity and a profit share on the miners and power sold when the miners are curtailed. So clearly there's going to have to be, there's a lot of detail in there because it sounds as if though there might be instances where Stronghold is selling electricity it's producing to the grid, and a portion of the profit that's being generated from selling electricity to the grid would be remitted to Foundry were this letter of intent to purchase hosted miners, et cetera, et cetera. If that were to come into fruition, that certainly would introduce some nuance to the math as it relates to, how much revenue Stronghold is generating based on selling the electricity it's producing directly to the grid, assuming no Bitcoin's being mined at all. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out to myself and to anyone watching this. Okay, so another item here that I do believe is very noteworthy is the total revenue for the 3 months ended September 30th, 2022. It's 24.7 million, a net loss of 75.2 million, adjusted EBITDA, and I want to spell that out. It's like E for Earth, B for Boy, I for Interest, T for Tom, D for David, A for Apple. So it's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So the reason that's noteworthy is when you look at a $75.2 million loss, the thing is, a significant portion of that pertains to depreciation, amortization, not other non-cash related, non-cash related expenses, if that makes sense. So I think that's noteworthy because it's not as if though from an operational standpoint, the company lost 75.2 million. That obviously that'll be catastrophic, but that, clearly that's not. So from an accounting standpoint, yes, that's the number. But in terms of adjusted, EBITDA, it was only around a $2.965 million loss. So let's say a $3 million loss. Obviously not optimal. You know what I mean? But clearly a big difference from 75.2 million. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so on page 8, this is the first time the company's ever provided formal guidance, and so it is quite interesting to take a look at this. The operational assumptions for average power output, 135 to 140 megawatt hours, or megawatts, I should say. And the reason you might say, hey, wait a minute, I thought that nameplate output would be closer to 165, right? 85 megawatts at Scrubgrass, about 80 megawatts at Panther Creek. But so this assumption takes into account downtime, which invariably happens with power plants. Average hash rate capacity around 3 exahash. Average miner uptime without miner curtailment about 90%. Average hash rate reflecting times when miners are curtailed to sell power around 2.4 exahash. So again, I'll definitely want to dig into those numbers a bit more. I'd encourage you to do so as well. So the market assumptions, and I think this is kind of interesting, Bitcoin price and network hash rate. So the assumption for 2023 is that Bitcoin will be around $20,000 a coin. Now, given everything that's been going on today, specifically today, as it relates to FTX and, a lot of gyrations in the marketplace, Bitcoin, I think was down at one point close to 16,000 a coin. So the assumption here, though, is, hey, for 2023, let's just assume a roughly $20,000 price with, and this is crucial, a network hash rate of 212 exahash. So when I look at my homemade dashboard right now and I refresh it, so right now Bitcoin's at 16.8, so $16,801.77 per coin. And the network hash rate is currently 272.89, so substantially higher than what the expectation is, or the assumption is for next year. Okay, implied hash price 0.085 terahash per second per day. On page on page 12 of the presentation, there's a hash price calculation formula. That's something I'll dig into, but it's kind of a new formula, a new metric that's been introduced, which I think is actually kind of cool. It's just one of those things where I'll have to do the math and try to bake this into all the other math that's going on with the dashboard. Our average around the clock grid price. Okay, this is interesting to me, and I believe on the conference call, again, I'll re-listen to this a bazillion times, but I believe this is not just a number plucked out of thin air, but I think it's based on the forward price curve published by PJM. I think I've seen some of this stuff myself. In fact, suffice it to say, Stronghold in their guidance is saying, all right, let's assume $64 per megawatt hour as the average around the clock grid price. Now this is where it gets kind of interesting, okay? Let's talk about actual money here. So total revenue, okay, and other income. And other income could include, for example, selling ash that's produced as an industrial byproduct of running these waste coal power plants. So total revenue and other income, okay, the guidance for 2023 is between 108 and $114 million. Interesting, okay? Recurring fuel and operations and maintenance expenses, anywhere from between $56 to $52. I'm sorry, $56 million to $52 million, somewhere in that range. And when translated to megawatt hours, it's around $46 to $52 per megawatt hour. Does that make sense? Again, I'm reading this kind of like in real time here. So, we have total revenue, roughly 108 to 114 million, recurring fuel and operations and maintenance expenses, roughly 56 million to 52 million. I don't know if that's a little slight typo. It could be reversed. 52 million to 56 million. And then that translates into roughly $46 to $52 per megawatt hour. Okay, makes sense. Recurring cash, general and administrative, between 18 million and 21 million dollars. And finally, the adjusted EBITDA would be, and again, this is the guidance, is between $29 million and $35 million. If this comes to fruition, if this happens, okay, right now, okay, Stronghold Digital Mining as a business, okay, has a market cap of $35.68 million. I think Matt, I mean, I'm laughing because it's such a comical valuation, but it's not a surprising valuation just given what's going on in the marketplace. But Matt, if I'm not mistaken, specifically said during the call, even with dilution and everything else, it's kind of like we're being priced as if we're on the precipice of bankruptcy, and that we're really, really far away from that. Like that's not even something that's in the front view mirror. It's not something that's on the radar. It's not. It's just not. It's really not something that from an operational standpoint, it's not really something that is true. But understandably, just given market dynamics, given what's going on with other companies, I mean, just today, as I record this, I think I know for sure, like our stock was down like over 15%. Certainly, that's not specific to any news pertaining to Stronghold. It's just the market environment that we're in. So yeah, so basically, if we achieve between $29 million and $35 million in EBITDA, I mean, you have to realize, and I did look this up, in a somewhat more, in a somewhat calmer market, in a somewhat more rational market, in a somewhat less stressed environment, the multiple that's typically applied to companies that operate in, say like specifically as like electricity producers, energy companies, it's generally between 5 times and 10 times EBITDA, right? We're basically, trading at like essentially 1 time EBITDA. So clearly there's a fairly significant valuation gap for understandable reasons. I mean, I get it, but again, it's not supported by the facts. It's not supported by the reality of our company's, actual, real world performance. It just isn't. Now, needless to say, if a comet or an asteroid were to, hit both Panther Creek and Scrubgrass, well, sure, we have a problem, okay? But absent something to that effect, and absent energy prices collapsing completely, while simultaneously Bitcoin prices collapsing to nothing, or the end of the world, absent those types of real, out of this world situations, our company's really not on the precipice of bankruptcy, but yet we're being priced as if though, tomorrow, on the heels of this very, I think, positive and constructive presentation, the company's going to announce, hey, we're going bankrupt. So it doesn't make sense. But you know what? It is what it is. But I do think that this guidance is very noteworthy. And so I'm drawing my own attention to it as well as yours. Okay, so that's pretty much it. There's a lot here that I'm going to still pour through, obviously, and there's a lot of math that has to be done. There's a lot of writing and calculating and thinking that needs to be done. But I'll tell you what, I think the topic of bankruptcy, that's the topic that hangs over a lot of companies within the Bitcoin ecosystem. And it's for very understandable reasons. So at this juncture, I believe and just know that, absent some really extreme circumstance, I'm very, very confident, extremely confident, that bankruptcy really is not something that we, as a company are heading towards, or that, we're a couple days away from, or a couple weeks away from, or a couple months away from. It's, I think as time goes on, and as we're able to execute on our plans, execute on our vision, execute on our operational, a lot of the operational foundation that, that has been set through, the plant upgrades, the maintenance, all the cost cutting, the effort that went into that, it's tremendous. We're gonna start moving away from, I think, this constant, fixation with, hey, are we going to go bankrupt? Oh my God, do we have too much debt? Are we going to be able to service the debt? Look, I get it. These are things that anyone thinks about, right? The company's thinking about it because otherwise they wouldn't have reduced their debt. The goal is to deleverage, and that is something they've successfully done. And so I think that the topic of bankruptcy, it's going to probably be around for the next couple of quarters, right? But there is going to come a point where it's just going to become more and more obvious that, all right, Stronghold isn't going anywhere. Stronghold is actually executing. Stronghold is doing well. Stronghold is performing. Stronghold is doing exactly what we're intending for the company to do, which is to ultimately be cash flow positive, okay, and to ultimately be a viable venture and a successful venture. And I think that these questions that still persist as to whether or not, is this going to be a going concern 6 months from now? Will this company ever generate any positive cash flow? I think we're going to start getting answers to that sooner than later. But for the foreseeable future, probably the next 3 to 6 months or so, there's probably still going to be some lingering doubt about that in the marketplace as we see other participants in this market go by the wayside. I'm really, really excited and grateful and just deeply encouraged by what I'm reading, by what I'm hearing, and by what I'm actually seeing when I go do my research. All right, so let's leave it at that, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.